Out front next, breaking news. The White House just subpoenaed. Democrats say the president's actions have left them no choice. The impeachment probe escalates tonight. Plus, Mike Pence slamming a request for Ukraine documents from him. The vice president's office says it doesn't appear to be serious. Really? And the other breaking news this hour. Doctors are revealing moments ago Bernie Sanders did have a heart attack. Let's go out front. And good evening. I'm Erin Burnett. Out front tonight, the breaking news. President Trump's White House subpoenaed. House Democrats issuing a subpoena to the White House moments ago. This is part of the impeachment inquiry. They say they are left with, quote, no choice after the White House refused to hand over documents related to Trump and Ukraine. This as Congress this hour has obtained new documents in the whistleblower complaint against President Trump. The Intelligence Community Inspector General, who deemed that whistleblower complaint both urgent and credible today, spent nearly 7 hours behind closed doors on Capitol Hill. Sources tell CNN that he gave documents showing how he worked to corroborate the whistleblower complaint, which of course alleges Trump tried to get Ukraine to dig up dirt on Joe Biden while he held up military aid to the country. Now, the story is moving very quickly at this hour. Of course, the big question now, will Trump order his team to defy a subpoena? Because tonight, the president himself is defiant, saying that all of this had nothing to do with Joe Biden.
I don't care about Biden's campaign, but I do care about corruption. His campaign, that's up to him. Politics, that's up to them. I don't care about politics.
Well, we know he does care about Biden a lot, and goodness knows he cares about politics. I mean, first Biden, right? Trump mentioned him by name in his phone call with the Ukrainian president multiple times, specifically asking the Ukrainian president to investigate him, even though there's nothing to show Joe Biden did anything wrong. In fact, President Trump's own former envoy to Ukraine told Congress in his newly released opening statement, and I quote, we just got this today, it's important to hear, I have known former Vice President Biden for 24 years, and the suggestion that he would be influenced in his duties as vice president by money for his son simply has no credibility to me. I know him as a man of integrity and dedication to our country. Well, look, we know Trump cares about Joe Biden, and one of the reasons we know is that he singles him out for insults all the time.
I'd rather run against, I think, Biden than anybody. I think he's the weakest mentally. Joe Biden has truly lost his fastball. Joe Biden is not playing with a full deck.
I mean, you look at a guy like Sleepy Joe Biden.
He brings him up all the time. He cares about Joe Biden, and he cares about politics. I mean, nobody cares about polls and who is up and who is down more than he. Trump loves polls.
Got great poll numbers. Our poll numbers are through the roof.
Every poll that I see and every poll that we have, I'm winning by, we're doing well.
Okay, Trump's polls explain his obsession with Joe Biden. The most recent head-to-head matchup was a Fox News poll, one the president would listen to. Joe Biden, 52, Trump 38. ABC News, Biden 55, Trump 40. Quinnipiac, Biden 54, Trump 38. Biden currently trouncing Trump, and the polls Trump adores, and that is why Trump cares so deeply about taking Biden down. Caitlin Collins is out front at the White House tonight. And Caitlin, obviously the subpoena, very significant. Any response from the White House? Obviously the subpoena came just moments ago. Have you heard anything yet?
No, they haven't gotten back to us yet, Aaron. We've reached out for comment, and they haven't said anything. Of course, as you noted, it just came out a short time ago. But we should note the White House was expecting this. Democrats signaled as much just a few days ago, essentially saying that they were sending a warning shot to the White House, that they weren't messing around in this impeachment inquiry that they've been pursuing. But people back here at the White House have a very different view of that. They essentially have been arguing that not only are they going to keep their distance, and they've been pretty dismissive of these requests so far, but they say that's because Democrats didn't vote to hold this formal impeachment inquiry. Democrats have said they don't need to pursue this impeachment inquiry that they're moving forward with, that Nancy Pelosi announced last week. But that is not the view here at the White House. And that's why right now we've been in these discussions with the White House about this draft of this letter that they're expected to send early next week. Right now is the timing we're hearing, though that's still unclear. Basically, this letter that's going to dare the House Speaker to bring a vote to the House floor to have her caucus vote on on essentially formally and officially doing this impeachment inquiry. The White House says they're not going to cooperate essentially until they get that. Right now, they're still waiting on it.
All right. Thank you very much, Caitlin. And certainly a showdown in the offing. Out front now, Democratic Congressman Denny Heck, member of the House Intelligence Committee. He was inside today's meeting with the Intelligence Community Inspector General. And I want to ask you about that, Congressman. But first, I want to start with the breaking news, the subpoena. Obviously, there's a game of chicken, and I don't mean to play light with it, but this is escalating, and it's a standoff. I mean, what happens if Trump's White House defies you?
So I think Chairman Schiff has made it abundantly clear that defiance of this act constitutes obstruction of a legitimate congressional inquiry in pursuit of impeachment. And as a consequence of that, we will assume or infer that he is not innocent of whatever it is that we're out to verify with the documentation. There's no other reason for him to withhold it, to hide it, unless, of course, he's guilty.
So when does a vote happen with this whole, they're trying to say, oh, you have to do a vote before they do anything. What's your sense of when a vote would happen for actual articles of impeachment?
Well, we have some more work to do. We have some other people that I think can add, frankly, materially to our understanding of what went on here. We have several of them scheduled for next week. As you know, the former ambassador to Ukraine is among them. We would hope that at some point we're able, while taking into account appropriate security precautions, an opportunity to talk to the whistleblower himself or herself. So we have some more work here to do to understand completely in all three dimensions the actual story and narrative of what's gone on here.
And I want to ask you about what you're going to ask them in a moment, because there are some crucial testimonies coming up. But I want to ask you about today when you met with the Intel Inspector General. Again, that's the person, Atkinson, who evaluated the whistleblower complaint, deeming it credible and urgent, gave you documents today, I understand, laid out his thinking and what he knew and when he knew it. What did you learn new?
So, first of all, I want to say that my reaction to Inspector General Atkinson was much the same it was the first time. The man is incredibly thorough, approaches his job with professionalism and integrity. And in fact, the very fact that we are able to, and at this point in time, be able to evaluate the whistleblower complaint is because he had the courage to come forward with it. So, look, as a matter of fact, since the Inspector General issued his report and with the issuance of the call report, they have verified everything that the complainant put forth. So we now know, in the President's own words, that he actively solicited in clear violation of federal law, the assistance of a foreign national government in support of his campaign in 2020.
So we also saw the text messages that Volker provided to Congress in his testimony this week. Volker, of course, Trump's envoy, right, to Ukraine, former, right? He has now resigned. Perhaps the most damning message that we all heard, though, or saw, came from the top diplomat in Ukraine, Bill Taylor. Bill Taylor, in this text, which came out in the Volker testimony, says, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with the political campaign. Okay, this is the top American diplomat in Ukraine. A stunning text, and I think it's important, Congressman, to make sure our viewers know that was sent before anyone in America knew there was a whistleblower or any issue with Ukraine. No one knew there was a story. That's what people who were involved thought this was. They thought it was a quid pro quo. What was the most powerful evidence you've seen in the past couple of days between the Inspector General testimony and Trump's now former envoy? Was it that text, or were there other things as powerful?
So I think the two most powerful things that have occurred are, first of all, the call report, the president's own words, in which he said, directly after a discussion about the sale of Javelin missiles to Ukraine, I need you to do us a favor, though. And that, combined with what Ambassador Taylor said about it being crazy to withhold security assistance, I think are incredibly damning. Their own words. And in fact, Aaron, I would respectfully suggest to you, that's why everybody on the Republican side seems to be in full-blown attack mode. I've said to you before that they only have 4 plays: deny, attack, play the victim, and change the subject through outrageous pronouncement. They're in scorched earth attack mode. They're attacking the process. They're attacking the whistleblower. They're attacking the Inspector General. A Republican senator today attacked President Obama. They're attacking Chairman Schiff. They're doing everything except defending these words, which are unbelievably, in and of themselves, incriminating.
Before we go, obviously you've got the subpoena to the White House, and I know you're giving them a deadline, I believe 2 weeks from now. Your committee also gave, though, a deadline tonight for Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Trump's lawyer Rudy Giuliani, right? That's the subpoena deadline for them tonight. They've got a few hours. Where do things stand?
Well, I just don't have much optimism whatsoever that they're going to comply with the law. They've shown no regard for it thus far to date. You know, what's really at trial here isn't just the narrow behavior of the incumbent president of the United States and his violation of this particular federal statute. It is the very principle of rule of law, and whether or not it is that people who hold public trust, those of us that are privileged to occupy these positions, are obligated under our constitutional oath of office to adhere to the law. We are, and those who aren't are going to be held accountable sooner or later.
Congressman Hack, thanks very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Next breaking news, Democrats want Ukraine documents from Mike Pence. The vice president's office now slamming that request this hour. Plus, Republicans. So many are so silent about what the president asking from foreign governments, but some are now speaking out. That ahead. And more breaking news. Doctors saying minutes ago that Bernie Sanders. Breaking news. Vice President Pence slamming House Democrats who are demanding documents from him as part of the impeachment inquiry as to whether President Trump pressured Ukraine's president to investigate Joe Biden in exchange for aid. Pence's office saying, quote, given the scope, it does not appear to be a serious request, but just another attempt by the do-nothing Democrats to call attention to their partisan impeachment. Now, if Pence doesn't comply, he could be hit with subpoenas. Like the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Rudy Giuliani, who, as I indicated, have until midnight tonight Eastern time to respond. And you just heard the congressman on the Intelligence Committee. They have not yet done so. Out front now, former New Jersey Attorney General Ann Milgram, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author Carl Bernstein, Glenn Donat, who represented President Clinton during his impeachment hearings, and senior justice correspondent Evan Perez. Evan, just so people understand, right, Trump sent Pence in his place to meet with the Ukraine president at one point. Sources are telling CNN Pence was told about the call where Trump pressured the Ukraine president to investigate the Bidens. He found out about it a day later. Unclear if he knew all parts of it, even though he was given a transcript. He may have been the one to deliver the message that you're not getting aid, but he may not have known about a quid pro quo. We just don't know. But he's at the heart of this, perhaps, right, Evan?
Right, he is at the heart of this. And look, one of the things we know about Mike Pence is that he's a very careful person. It's hard to believe that he would not have read carefully that 5-page transcript of the call. It's hard to believe that he wouldn't prepared himself as much as he could before he went to this important meeting. He is somebody who is well known for doing exactly that. So I think the Democrats want more information simply because they believe they're not buying the story right now that the vice president's camp is telling. And as you said, he's enmeshed in the middle of all of this because he is the one who has that face-to-face meeting with the Ukrainian president.
So, Ann, should he be worried, Mike Pence? I mean, obviously, the next step here would be a formal subpoena.
Yes, I mean, I expect that he will be subpoenaed, given the statement that he made. And remember, there are so many people that are involved in this in one way or another. And as Evan just said, Pence is directly in it. The Democratic committees have to get his evidence. They have to find out what messages, what conversations he had, what he knew when. So absolutely, this will not stop with him just saying that it's not a legitimate request.
And Carl, will it fly? That he says, I knew nothing about it. Yeah, I was briefed on the call, but not the part about the favor. And I had the transcript, but I didn't read it. I didn't know why I was told to withhold the aid.
There's nothing credible about what he's saying. But more important, let's pull back. And what are we really looking at here? We are looking at an impeachment inquiry that suggests, with some real factual basis, that there has been a conspiracy led by the President of the United States, or might have been, but looking like a real likelihood, a conspiracy led by the President of the United States to undermine our electoral system by kneecapping his most formidable political opponent, Joe Biden, and mortgaging our foreign policy to his own political ends. And who might be involved in this perhaps conspiracy? The Vice President of the United States, the President's personal attorney, perhaps the Attorney General of the United States. All of this is going to get sorted out in the coming weeks and months. But also, we're talking about high crimes if this is what happened. There's very little doubt. If the record is established, these are high crimes.
And Glenn, to that point, How is this compare at this point to what you went through, right? An impeachment inquiry about a guy lying about sex to what we are seeing now involving foreign policy and a possible quid pro quo.
Right. I mean, to follow up on Carl's point, this is a legitimate impeachment inquiry. 20 years ago in the Clinton impeachment, we saw, with all due respect, an illegitimate impeachment inquiry. That was about personal conduct, lies about personal conduct that were escalated and elevated into a partisan exercise. None of the senior officers of the Clinton administration were involved in any meaningful way because it was private conduct. Here, as Ann and Carl said, this is the central core. It's a significant core of the Trump cabinet who have to get lawyers who are fact witnesses, who might be adverse to one another, who will be instructed by lawyers that they shouldn't talk to each other for fear of being alleged to have obstructed justice. This is an allegation into abuse of power, what Hamilton and Madison were talking about in the Federalist Papers. It's core impeachment material.
And Evan, you now have the White House itself being subpoenaed, and you've got this deadline for Rudy Giuliani, deadline for Mike Pompeo. White House now subpoenaed, Mike Pence likely to be subpoenaed. But obviously, the subpoena, as I understand it today, hours ago, was just delivered to the Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney.
That's right. And the White House says that, they're not going to play ball with this because they say it's illegitimate. But there's an interesting thing that the president did today is that one of the things that he's essentially daring Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats to do is to formally vote on an impeachment inquiry and to essentially formalize this process. One of the things they want to do is the Republicans want to be able to perhaps fight on the same ground by being able to subpoena witnesses and perhaps be able to bring up some of the things that the president has been trying to bring up on Joe Biden and other parts of this story. So I think that's part of the other game that they're playing here, is that they want to be able to fight back. And right now, only the Democrats are able to really wield subpoenas and so on. So I think that's the other game that's being played. It's a political one.
Carl?
Well, this also involves a possible or likely cover-up, which is also a conspiratorial act. And what is it that
You're talking about putting it on the server and the people who knew about that?
Yes, but also about the lockbox, about those conversations, those summaries that are now in the White House under digital lock and key at the highest classification. And what do they reveal? They may well be the key to unraveling a conspiracy. And obviously the White House does not want to give up those documents, those conversations with Putin, with Ukraine, with any more of these leaders, with China. And that's going to be a huge fight. But there is, again, the suggestion of two parts of a conspiracy: to undermine the electoral system, to hold our foreign policy hostage to the president's personal wishes and needs, and then to cover it up involving all of these people and perhaps involving the State Department as well.
To this point, Glenn, one question in all of this that I have had as we've learned about more and more calls being put on this, unprecedented code name server, right? Whether it's China or Putin or a call with Mohammed bin Salman in the midst of the Jamal Khashoggi situation where he sided with him over the CIA. If they really were trying to cover this up, Glenn, and they were going to put it on that server, why didn't they just try to destroy some of it?
That's a good question, because it doesn't seem like any red line was one that couldn't be
I guess
crossed.
that's what I'm saying. It seems like what I'm saying is crazy, but if you're willing to do all these other things, where do you draw the line?
Too many people saw it to begin with. Let's start there.
So just putting it on a server?
That would make it worse. That would make it worse.
Right, and I guess that would require the involvement of additional people, probably who realize that would cross the line into real violations of the record-keeping obligations, and they just, whether Trumpers, people call them the deep state. These are probably people who take their obligations seriously, and thankfully weren't corrupted by the same impulse that has affected a lot of other people in this White House.
I think that's right. I think also that the reality is people use the amount of sort of obstruction that they have to get something out of view. And at that moment in time, they just didn't want it to go out widely. This idea of putting it under this passcode, this lock code, was a sure, very quick way, exactly, to basically get something out.
Let's think of them as equivalent to the Nixon tapes. Nixon didn't want to give up his tapes in Watergate, and the tapes ultimately are what did him in. Here we have the president's words paraphrased, his actions, his conduct. That's going to be the big fight.
All right, all of you stay with me. Next, the Republicans. A few are now speaking out against the president. So who and why and where are the rest of them? And the breaking news about Bernie Sanders, doctors just revealing that he had a heart attack. when he was admitted to the hospital earlier this week. A major development in that story. Dr. Sanjay Gupta out front. The breaking news this hour, House Democrats are ramping up their impeachment inquiry. They have just issued a subpoena to Trump's White House. It comes after the White House refused to hand over documents related to Trump and Ukraine. Now, tonight, some Republicans are ripping President Trump, not just for Ukraine, but also publicly asking China to investigate 2020 rival Joe Biden and his son. Mitt Romney today tweeting, when the only American citizen President Trump singles out for China's investigation is his political opponent in the midst of the Democratic nomination process, it strains credulity to suggest that it is anything other than politically motivated. By all appearances, the president's brazen and unprecedented appeal to China and to Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden is wrong and appalling. That's the sitting Senator Mitt Romney. And retiring Republican Congressman, former CIA officer Will Hurd said this on camera today.
I think it's terrible. It's something that I wouldn't have done. I think that is something that a president of the United States shouldn't be doing.
Okay. Everyone is back with me. Carl, let me just start with you. Look, Senator Romney and Congressman Hurd are in the minority. And when I say minority, I mean in a minority of two. Okay. But look, there are others who have spoken out, Congressman Turner about the call itself, although not about everything. Ben Sass, I'll get to that. But what do you make of those two actually speaking out? I mean, is that a moment of courage right now?
I think it's courageous, perhaps, to an extent. In Romney's case, Hurd all along, Hurd has been a lone voice in his party going back. But what's happening with Romney, and I have not spoken to people around him in a while, is the question, is he setting himself up to possibly run for the presidency if this thing becomes more and more toxic, if there are other Republicans who move toward what he's saying? It's a long shot that this would happen. Right now, everybody is pretty much in lockstep. This president, we have seen the president of the United States at his most unhinged. And that, too, is having in the last few days, a big effect on Republicans. If you talk to them in private, they are really concerned about the stability of the president of the United States.
And Glenn, you know that that what the other party is doing is crucial. I mean, certainly Carl knows it, from covering Watergate. Like, what matters here is what Republicans are going to do. We know the Democratic point of view on this. It's what Republicans are going to do. And you've lived through that, looking at the other parties, saying, are people going to speak out?
Right, and you saw certainly in the 90s a lot more Democrats who were on the president's side than spoke out. Not many ultimately went along for impeachment, but they certainly decried the conduct in a way that we haven't seen here. The Republican ranks are very tight. It seems to me these are very, very episodic anomalies compared to what we saw in the 90s, where you saw senior Democratic senators like Joe Lieberman speak out forcefully against the conduct. And we haven't seen anything like that in the Republican Party.
Well, here's
today.
where Watergate is very relevant, because the heroes of Watergate were Republicans who broke ranks.
Right.
And that is why Richard Nixon had to leave office,
And that's
because
what we're not
Barry
seeing here.
Goldwater, the presidential nominee of his party, marched to the White House, told Richard Nixon that he did not have the votes in the Senate to survive a trial, including Goldwater's on vote, and that was the end of Nixon. That Nixon then decided that day
a far cry from that now. But when you look at the senatorial ranks, which is where this is going to go down, Evan, if there is to be a move, right? Obviously, Mitt Romney is the lone voice, although you have others who have criticized parts of this, right? But let me talk about Rubio. He has said China posed this century's most significant threat, not only to the security and economic interests of America and other democracies, but also to the values of freedom and openness that we hold dear. So that's his point of view. And yet, today, he had this to say about Trump's public plea for the Chinese president to investigate Joe Biden. Here's Marco Rubio.
I don't think it's a real request. I think he did it to gig you guys. I think he did it to provoke you to ask me and others and get outraged by it. Like I said, he plays it like a violin and everybody falls right into it, but that's not a real request.
Okay, so Evan, what he's trying to say is it totally would not be okay, but he didn't do it, right? Is that opening the door here? At least he's not saying, oh, it's totally fine. He's just saying it was a joke.
Right, exactly. And I think this is what's happening with the president. He sort of gets graded on a curve, you know. And I think that's the same thing that the way the Justice Department looked at this request. I think they looked at what the president said on that call, and they almost sort of decided that, you know, look, he couldn't have been serious. And look, if someone else maybe had done this, I think maybe other people would, you know, would have a different reaction. But because of the way the president speaks, I think he does get graded differently, and it does get treated differently. The question is, right, when the President of the United States says something, you know, in the past at least, it was taken very seriously, but we've seen it repeatedly, including from the Justice Department, that people say, well, you know, when he tweets, that's not really what the government policy is, or that's not what we mean. And so I think that's exactly what's happening all over again.
Can we look at the fact that he has said, allegedly, and with some justification, we have reason to believe it, much the same thing to the Australians, the Chinese, the people of Ukraine, the Prime Minister and President of Ukraine, to Boris Johnson. So he's gone around the world with this to try and undermine the campaign and Biden by offering something perhaps to these other foreign leaders.
And here's the thing, a lot of this is going to come down to voters. So we're talking about Republican senators and the pressure they're under. Here's an exchange that the Republican Senator Joni Ernst had with a voter at a town hall about President Trump. So this just happened. Here she is.
Where is the line? When are you guys going to say enough and stand up and say, you know what, I'm not backing any of this? You yourself served. You didn't pledge an oath to the president. You pledged it to our country. You pledged it to our Constitution.
I can say yay, nay, whatever. President is going to say what the president is going to do. It's up to us as members of Congress to continue working with our allies, making sure that we remain strong in the face of adversity.
But it's okay for our president to extort other countries to investigate.
You know, okay, we're going to move on to another question. But what I would say is we can't determine that yet. So not jumping to any conclusions. We don't have the full story yet.
So this is an extraordinary exchange, and the thing I love about it, and I watched it this morning, is that it reminds all of us that the senators and the president work for the people of the United States of America. And this woman is sitting there asking the exact questions that I think